So today I'd like to talk a bit about post-war investigation in Germany and how we can use this documentation to uncover the mass crimes against Jews, but as well other populations in Soviet Union. And I totally agree with what Yuri at the end said, is that we, first of all, need to read all the pieces of evidence from the CGK, the Extraordinary Commission, from the KGB, and as well the German post-war investigation documentation with its flaws and advantages. Because even the German post-war investigations were done in a subjective way. We have depositions of witnesses who sometimes not telling the truth, even if they need to tell the truth. And of course, we have depositions of defendants. For example, Christian talked about Filbert. He was a defendant, so he could lie, he could tell whatever he wanted to tell. And of course, we need to take this into account. So even the German documents, I say even because sometimes we take them too seriously, in my opinion, even them are flawed, and we always need to converge all the information that we have. So, the story of the German archives is very tied to the Zentrale Stelle in the small town in southern Germany in Ludwigsburg. I mean, many of you know this institution. Germany awakened very late when it came to investigating crimes. It was only in the late 50s that a systematic research on crime started. Suddenly, German society realized that not everybody was in the Wehrmacht and fought the good war, that there were much more SS men and other personnel in other units committing crimes during World War II. And so a special investigation unit started its work in the small town of Ludwigsburg and did pre-investigations that then later went to the real state attorneys who made cases of this. Perhaps just to give you an example, yes. So the biggest post-war trial that we know in Germany is the Auschwitz case that made two different trials in Frankfurt. This is the main trial in Frankfurt. The thing about the Frankfurt trial about Auschwitz-Birkenau, that the prosecutors, and at the head Fritz Bauer, who is a very famous and successful prosecutor when it came to the Holocaust, had to choose between try all the perpetrators they found working in Birkenau, 800, or do a selection. They chose to do a selection, so they only tried, in this trial, as you see, 12 person. There are much more people in the room because every defendant has 2 lawyers on the side. And this is how they were tried. You have as well same trials related to Babi Yar. We have 2 of them, or I would say even 3. One, the Darmstadt trial in '68 against member of the Sonderkommando 4A. Then a few years later against 3 men from the police battalion 45, we spoke about them today. And then as well, late 60s, the trial against the personnel of the Sonderkommando 1005, who did then in 43 the burning of the remains in Babi Yar. And usually afterward, after the burning of the corpses, they would kill the Jewish slaves or work slaves they used for it. So these are the trials connected to Babi Yar. How we can use these materials. These materials are now accessible through the Federal Archive, the Bundesarchiv. They're in the same building. So if you go to Ludwigsburg, you can see still prosecutors working, and there are still trials ongoing in Germany. Perhaps you heard about it last week. Trials started again. An ex-secretary who worked in Stutthof, and I think day after tomorrow there will be a trial near Berlin starting against Wachmann, who is 100 years old and who worked in Sachsenhausen. So there are still ongoing trials. When it comes to Babi Yar, there are investigations as well, but the problem is that what Martin stressed at the beginning this morning is when it comes to a mass shooting, it's difficult to prove the fact that someone participated in the killing. When it came to a camp, for Demjanjuk, for example, it was easy. We just had to prove Demjanjuk was a Travniki. He was at the time of the deportations and killing of the Jews in Sobibor, and we knew that every Travniki had a special task, and regardless of the task, everything was directed to help the killing machine. And that sufficed for the justice. In the case of the mass killing, the thing is, we know they were in the units. We know the unit were in Kiev, but we don't know sometimes if they were as well in Babi Yar or helping their colleagues. So this is what's so difficult to prove it, and this is why recent cases about personnel that were in Kiev, we could pinpoint it. They were in Kiev, but we don't know what they did exactly. Perhaps they were sick. Perhaps they were somewhere else. Because we know that some policemen, for example, for the battalions, weren't on duty in Babi Yar, but somewhere else in Kiev. Good. Now a bit on the material. The material is very interesting. We don't only have material from German witnesses or perpetrators. This is what I wanted to stress out. Like Kirill Pfefferman said, there was a work between German and Soviet justice. This is a very important point. Jasmin Söhner is working on her PhD at the University of Heidelberg on this, because you have to understand there were no justice work between Soviet Union and West Germany, but the Nazi crimes. So the Soviet Union not only sent these kind of material, this is the KGB who would interrogate witnesses for the Germans, on behalf of the Germans. Not only that, German prosecutors and even policemen could come to the Soviet Union and interrogate witnesses with the help of the KGB. I read the reports of the prosecutors and the judges, and they said it was fantastic. They were so kind to us, we could ask every question we wanted. Great. And we know as well that, for example, at the Darmstadt trial, we had as well people from Soviet Union come, like Dina Pronicheva, who spoke at the Darmstadt trial. Why? Of course, for propaganda measures, because Soviet Union wanted always to show the guilt of Germany, Western Germany, when it came to the Holocaust and other crimes. Okay, so this is just an example. We spoke about the Police Battalion 45. Martin Besser, who is one of the more important officers of this commando. What I wanted to show very, very quickly is this is a crime in Shepetovka in the Khmelnytsky region he's witnesses about. And I just want to show you the argumentation or the typical why we need really study it thoroughly what the German perpetrators are saying. So he's saying, I received the order to liquidate the Jews of Shepetovka. At the time, I had again been convoked to Franz, this is his supervisor, who had also settled in the city. The order was given to me orally. This happened without doubt in the presence of the adjutant. Then I said, I do not know if there are Jews living here, neither how many, nor in what way I have to execute this order. He replied, go see the head of the militia, he will tell you where the Jews live. So I went there. The head of the militia was a Ukrainian, who was accompanied by a member of the general staff. He told me that the Jews were easy to find, that there were very few, and that they were living here and there. In the evening of the same day, with my interpreter, an Ukrainian who was a former Austrian officer, I went to the street where the Jews lived. It was evening already. I wanted my interpreter to inform some people so they could escape. My interpreter also did not want to know anything about these things. I hoped that the Jews would pass the warning on so that most of the Jewish inhabitants could flee. Later on, I learned that the shooting of the Jews of Shepetovka, there must have been about 40 to 50 men and women, but I cannot give any exact numbers, was conducted in a little forest next to for a depot of ammunition. Sometimes you encounter such strange interrogations where we have a very straight narrative about taking orders and carrying orders out, and suddenly the narrative is changing where the person is trying to say that he didn't do anything, or, as says here Besser, he wasn't at the place of the crime. He didn't participate in the shooting. Okay. Another example, what we find as well, are not only, as I call them, German voices, but as well voices of survivors, because a lot of inquiries were made in Israel, in the United States, in Australia and Canada. A lot of survivors through the embassies of Western Germany had done depositions. So here, for example, you have a letter from Jack Donnick from Cleveland, who is telling about his survivor in Radziwiłł. And of course, these people as well were often invited to be witnesses at the trials. That was really hard for them, because at that time nobody cared really for them during the trials. And in the same way, with the defendants and their lawyers were very aggressive towards them. So we know as well there is a big debate in the 70s that went even to the Knesset, where Israeli politicians even complained to Germany saying, you need to pay more attention to Jewish survivors coming to speak before courts because they're handled very badly. Okay, then the next slide. And now just very quickly what I want to show you as well, photographs. We have a lot of photographs that we can find here and there. Unfortunately, not on Babi Yar, but on many other places in Ukraine. I give you an example when it comes to the shooting of the Jews in Kryvyi Rog, that it was in October 1541. 2,500 men, women, and children, Jewish children, were killed, with 800 prisoners of war. And Alfred Thiel wrote to the prosecutor's office in 1960, was investigated against men of Jekeln's headquarters. We heard about Jekeln. He was as well one of the main orchestrators of Babi Yar. He is here again 50 days later in Kryvyi Rog. And Alfred Thiel is just a passing by soldier who is witnessing the shooting. So he hears about this and he says, I'd like to know what's going on. We were curious to see how the action against the Jews in Kryvyi Rog was going. So he's moving there. I returned to the quarters in the morning. On my way to the southwestern exit of the city in a service vehicle, I passed a group of about 2,500 Jews. There were men and women of all ages at this point that I took the attached photos. Because you have to understand, a lot of German soldiers, policemen, had a photo camera, a Leica. We know that at least a million of Leicas was held by Wehrmacht soldiers. So this is what we have that Thiel took as a picture. And you see, this is exactly what Father Dubois said this morning. The crime against the Jews, the Holocaust by bullet, was public. Not only for the local population, but for the Germans as well, units that weren't involved at all. It was for them a happening as well. So Thiel is curious and is taking, of course, pictures because he's in disbelief with what is happening. He's taking more pictures. And then he's explaining to us. I asked a German in police uniform, if I remember correctly, who was walking at the head of the convoy, what was going to happen to these people. He answered that he was taking them for a nap. Okay, so what you see here are the Jewish population of Kryvyi Rog on the 15th of October 41 on the way to the mass grave, to the shooting. See, same thing, like in Babi Yar, they are told to take their clothes for several days. They will be brought somewhere else. And as you see, whole families are going to the place. a series of 12 photos. Yeah, as well to show you as well that I think as well in Babi Yar we had the same, that of course elder people couldn't walk by themselves, and they were as well brought by carts to the place. So it would be as well interesting to know exactly if the carts would go through the checkpoint to the mass graves, or how the people then had to walk. Okay, and then Thiel is explaining us in his letter, next to the group walked Ukrainian auxiliary police. They wore steel helmets and were armed with batons. Okay, so you see the guy on the left. So I show you this as well, is to show you how important it is, and this is why I'm so, let's say, frustrated about hairless photos, is to know the photograph story, why he took the pictures, which interactions he had. And unfortunately, Helle died just before the end of the war, and we don't know anything about his motives, about his ideas taking the pictures in Babi Yar, in Kiev, and in Lubny. We can only make hypotheses. Here we know exactly why Thiel made these photos. Shortly afterwards, I passed a group of about 800 soldiers on their way back to the quarters. They were being watched by the German police. When I wanted to know who they were, I was told that they were all Jews. I also took some pictures of the group. You see? And again, what's interesting is that nobody is saying anything. So you could take pictures, you could watch. There was nobody saying anything. I stress this out because we know that in the Wehrmacht and in the SS there were multiple orders that forbid to take pictures. And still, we have a lot of photo material, especially from Wehrmacht soldiers. As you see as well, this is why it's important even more. We have the numbers from the archives. We know 2,500 men, women, and children, 800 soldiers. When we see those photos, we can have a proof here as well and crisscross the information and find out if the numbers are quite accurate or not. When I got back to my quarters, I told the men in my unit what I had observed. So I suggested to my comrade that they accompany me to see if it was true. Around 2 p.m., we left the city in the direction of the convoy we were observing. The Ukrainian auxiliary police had set up posts along the way. We heard gunshots after 30 minutes and continued on foot. About 100 Russian soldiers were being guarded and were standing barefoot in front of a step in the same place where many clothes and suitcases belonging to civilians. There were also Russian uniforms. The last part, the Russian soldiers were pushed into the ravine in groups of 15 with their arms folded over their heads. I went to a group that was standing in front of a pit with my comrade. The one standing in front had to kneel down at the edge of the pit. He was then shot in the back of the head by one of the policemen standing next to him. As soon as he fell into the pit, the next one took his place, and so on, until the whole group was completely exterminated. So as you see again, Thiel, what is impressive here, is able to get really near the place. It's almost as if he were several meters at the place. So this testimony and the letter and the photographs I published 3 years ago in France in my book. So you're invited to find it. There are much more examples like this where I try to find the related stories to the photographs of soldiers in Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, where witnesses, sometimes only witnesses, sometimes even participants of the crime. So this is what you can find in the German archives throughout of the different archives, regional and the federal archives. Thank you very much for your attention.